Hi vinyl community, John here. This is going to be my video where I show some VCLT that I got from the vinyl professor, James Griffiths. I think it was in the spring now, it's quite some time ago. I took some time to make this video, I guess, because I wanted to listen to the records that he sent, but also he sent me a book. Okay, here goes. So the book that James sent me was this. It's called Zeppelin Symbols by Eric Davis. It's a nice little book. There's a whole series of these books. Quite a nice little book. James sent this to me because I made that video response to Grebo 69 about what was it now? I can't remember what it was called. Something about a record by a band that I love but I don't like, something like that. And I spoke about Led Zeppelin 4. It's my least favourite Zeppelin album. And I kind of spoke about why. So it led to a bit of dialogue between James and I, and he sent me this book to read through, and it is actually quite a nice little book. It speaks a lot about the history of the album, the making of it, and what the band were going through and things, and it's actually really very informative, really great. I think James's idea was to sort of change my mind about it. And although I will say this, it's still not my favourite Led Zeppelin record. I do have a much deeper appreciation of it now, after reading this. Yeah, the book's well thumbed. I've been carrying this around with me and I keep on reverting back, and so thanks very much, James. That was a really cool book. I can recommend it for anybody else. Okay, now the records. I'm playing on my computer here this album. James sent me this. This is a lovely brand spanking new copy of the Boggles album, The Age of Plastic. I had their second record, and James has often spoke about this. That's that clear vinyl. Very nice copy, very nice record indeed. Amazing VCLT. And yeah, so James and I spoke about this record, the second album I have. My children like it a lot. I quite enjoy putting it on. But I hadn't heard this one before, and James has often spoken about it. So he sent it to me. It's really great. So it's the first album by Boggles. This is Trevor Horn, and this is Jeff Downes. While they were making this, interestingly, this is quite a well-known story, but I'll talk about it now. In the studio, or in the next studio from where they were the remnants of Yes, and I think they were minus a keyboard player, and they were minus a vocalist for some reason. I don't really know why, but a few of them were there trying to make a record, so they got into discussion with these two guys who were making a sort of a 80s pop record in the next studio, and asked me if they would sort of come along and mind filling in just for a little bit, just in the studio, so they could write some songs. And it got on really well. So these two actually joined Yes, just for one album, and they made that album called Drama, which is actually a really good record, and one of my favourite progressive rock albums. What I like about it is that it's slightly different from Yes that went before, and I always think that it has a kind of a Neo-prog feel to it, before Neo-prog had been invented. I'll come back to that in a little while because I'm going to show some more records that link up with that. But I've always thought of Drama by Yes as sort of a very early example of something that would have inspired neo-progressive rock. Anyway, so they made the album together, which is something about modern recording. I can't remember the name of that record now. But by then it was basically just treble horn, I think. Jeff Downes had gone off and joined Asia, and the rest is history. This is a great record. It's 80s synthesizer pop music, beautifully produced. Can't really tell you more about it than that. It is what it is. It's lots of catchy songs. There's a kind of quality to it. I want to say like a digital feel to it, but that's not really what I mean. But it's not analog. It feels very much, you know. A lot of it is I think is made in the production of the record. Anyway, great record. Thanks, James. I sent the next records I'm going to show. There are 4 by this next band. James contacted me and said that he'd seen these records at a local charity shop, I think, and asked me if I had them. I didn't, so he was good enough to go and pick them up for me and send them to me as a VCLT. So the band was IQ. Now IQ are, like I said before, a neo-progressive rock band, or neo-prog. And for those that perhaps aren't familiar with the term neo-prog, it's basically progressive rock music that happened after the 70s, and I would say it's a little bit more sort of concise than traditional progressive rock music. There's a lot less sort of pomp, and I guess it's a similar kind of style of music, but just a bit more compacted, and it's also makes use of the technology that was available at the time. So you don't hear any Hammond organs or Wurlitzers or Moogs. Instead, you're hearing Roland and Yamaha keyboard sounds instead. So this album came out pretty much the same time as Marillion released their first album, and it's I would bunch these pretty much closely together with Marillion. Marillion basically being the most successful neo-prog band, and the sound isn't a million miles away. So this is the first album they did, Tales from the Lush Attic. They didn't sell anywhere near as many records as Marillion did. Look at that. And I will say that IQ generally are a band that I've never actually seen on the vinyl community spoken about by anybody. Very nice of you to go and get these for me, James. And they are, an excellent addition to anybody's collection of progressive rock. So this is their next album, called The Wake. And you can see how 80s they are here. I'll talk a bit more about neo-prog. Is that they were, very, very heavily influenced by Yes and Genesis, I will say. That's where basically the sound of Neo-prog derives from. And yeah, personally I would sort of quote the Drama album by Yes, but also Flick of the Tail by Genesis. I would say that's another very sort of obvious influence on the neo-progressive rock movement. So these first two albums, they sounded very much like a band that was very much interested in Genesis. You know, there's been a lot of talk, isn't there, before about, for instance, with Marillion, that people that heard them for the first time on the radio thought that Marillion had that Genesis had started making good records again. Only to find out it wasn't actually Genesis, it was this new band called Marillion. Well, you could probably say the same of these IQ, that they're a bit like that in the beginning. So that was the first two albums. The next album, IQ, called Non Zamo. They get a new vocalist at this point, and I think this guy, yeah, he's not trying to sound like Peter Gabriel when he sings, but it's on Vertigo. He seems to sort of bring the band sort of a little bit away from sounding like old Genesis, pushes them forward. Although this album, by the time they made this album, I think they were getting encouragement from their record label to, you know, make records that were going to sell, and to hopefully get radio hits. So that album, and then this next album, this is the fourth album, Are You Sitting Comfortably? These two albums are actually quite commercial compared to what they were doing in the beginning, and then what they went on to do after this. Anyway, I'm very, very happy to have these in my collection, because I didn't have them. Never even heard them before. And there we go, label. Squawk. Yeah, what can I say? They're brilliant. You know, me, I like prog. I can listen to it all day long. One thing I will say about 80s progressive rock music, because I mean people still make it today. The neo-progressive sounds. There are bands like Galahad and Magenta and lots of bands like that that fall under that bracket. But the ones made in the 80s, yeah, they do suffer a little bit from that 80s production. It doesn't bother me. I know a lot of people speak about their problems with the earlier Marillion albums, is the sort of the 80s production. I think it goes over my head, to be honest with you, a little bit. But these do very sound much like 80s records. And the latter stuff that they make now obviously doesn't, but there you go. So it was the album that came out after this that I have on CD, and that was my first IQ record, or IQ album, sorry, that I ever heard. And so my sort of following from IQ started from that point, so it's brilliant to be able to get these now on vinyl and fill my knowledge and appreciation of this band in from the sort of beginnings. So the last record I'm going to show is the last one that James sent me. It's The Best of Del Shannon. It's a bit of a surprising record that he put in. I can only assume that it had something to do with I think we've been having a bit of dialogue about the fact that rock and roll gets next to no love on the VC, Wondering why that is, you know. There aren't many people that actually do talk about rock and roll. Well, Elvis Presley, for that matter, king of rock and roll, barely gets a mention. So maybe that's why James sent me this. So Del Shannon, he's famous for his sort of singles, The Runaway and what else? Do You Wanna Dance, for instance. All I can say really is that my relationship to music like this is, you know, it springs right back to my childhood. My parents were of the generation aroundabouts that had their youth in the 50s, or their youth or their sort of early 20s, that were happening in the 1950s. And that was obviously, you know, the era of rock and roll and things like that. And when I was a boy, we used to, as a family, go to the local social club. It's probably a very British phenomenon. I don't know if you have them in the States or not, but it's basically a drinking hole, but you have to be a member to go along with it. And yeah, they are fairly working class. This place was run by the British Legion, so in that time you had to have been in the services or be former services or something, or even be in the services. That's not the same rule now, but that's what it was in those days. And women couldn't be members; they could only be affiliated members. Men were members, and if they had a wife, then the wife was a member by default. So in this place, there were lots of men that I at the time would have said they were old men, but really they were probably around about my age now, sort of middle-aged men, maybe drifting off into their 50s perhaps. And they were pretty much this style. See this guy's hairstyle? They looked very much like that. And these men that had their youth in the 50s, some of it in the 60s, they kind of had this thing about them that was very much sort of left over from the rock and roll years. And yeah, this music was very prevalent. I mean, Runaway, that's why I would have learned that song just through hearing it played through the speakers at the social club. The Everly Brothers were another good example of the music that was played then. Elvis, of course. There even used to be a guy that went up there that was kind of nicknamed the King, because he was very much into Elvis. So yeah, this sort of music reminds me very much of those times. Yeah, might start a thread about showing rock and roll, see how it goes. But anyway, so that's my brilliant VCLT from James. Thank you very much, James. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Check out my next video. Bye. Oh, and thanks, James, so much. Check out James's channel. You've got 1 billion subscribers now. Lapped me, what, 2 or 3 times, I shouldn't wonder, already. I can remember when you couldn't write your name on a gate, but now you seem to be very popular. I called that one. Alright, thanks very much. Bye.